The autumn air was crisp as Staff Sergeant James Cooper adjusted his old leather jacket, a cherished reminder of his father who had also served in the military. At 34, James stood tall at 6'2", his muscular frame carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had seen 3 combat tours. Today wasn't about war or military service, though. It was about something far more precious, spending time with his 9-year-old daughter, Emma. "Daddy, can we get hot dogs before finding our seats?" Emma asked, her blue eyes sparkling with excitement. She was wearing her favorite team jersey, slightly too big for her small frame, but she had insisted on wearing it anyway. James smiled, remembering how she had saved her allowance for 3 months to buy it. "Of course, princess. Hot dogs and maybe some nachos too." James watched as his daughter's face lit up. These simple moments meant everything to him, especially after missing so many while deployed overseas. He had only been back home for 2 months, and every minute with Emma felt like a gift. The stadium was already buzzing with energy. It was a crucial game. If their team won today, they would secure a spot in the playoffs. Fans dressed in team colors moved through the corridors like streams of blue and gold, their excited chatter echoing off the concrete walls. As James and Emma waited in line at the concession stand, he noticed a group of bikers entering the stadium. There were 5 of them, all wearing black leather vests with some kind of club insignia on the back. James's military training automatically kicked in as he observed them. It was a habit he couldn't shake. The leader appeared to be a tall man with a scraggly gray beard and a red bandana. Something about their body language made James uneasy, but he pushed the feeling aside. This was Emma's day, and he wasn't going to let anything spoil it. "Here you go, sweetheart." James handed Emma her hot dog, carefully wrapped in foil. "Don't forget the napkins this time. Your mom wasn't too happy about the mustard stains on your last jersey." They both laughed, remembering how Emma had tried to hide the stains by wearing her jacket zipped up on a hot summer day. Finding their seats was easy. Section 103, row 12, seats 5 and 6. They had a perfect view of the field, and Emma couldn't contain her excitement as she pointed out her favorite players warming up on the field. James helped her identify each player, reading their numbers from the distance, his sharp eyesight, honed by years of military service, coming in handy. About 20 minutes before kickoff, James heard loud voices and laughter coming from several rows behind them. The biker group had settled into row 15, and they weren't being subtle about their presence. Their voices carried the slight slur of people who had been drinking, and their language was far from family-friendly. "Daddy, what does that word mean?" Emma asked innocently after hearing one of the bikers shout something particularly crude. James felt his jaw tighten. "It's not a nice word, Emma. Let's focus on the game instead. Look, they're about to introduce the players." He successfully redirected her attention as the stadium announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. The pre-game ceremony was beautiful. A local high school choir sang the national anthem, and James stood at attention. Old habits die hard. Emma, noticing her father's posture, tried to stand just as straight. The moment would have been perfect if not for the occasional bursts of raucous laughter and shouting from behind them. James noticed other families in their section growing uncomfortable. A mother 2 rows ahead kept looking back nervously while trying to distract her young son. An elderly couple to their right had already gotten up and moved to different seats. The stadium staff seemed hesitant to approach the bikers, who had grown louder as kickoff approached. As the teams took their positions for the opening play, James made a mental note of the nearest exits and security stations, another habit from his military days. He hoped he was being overly cautious, but something about those bikers set off warning bells in his mind. Still, he was determined to enjoy this day with Emma. They had been planning this father-daughter outing for weeks. "Ready for some football, princess?" James asked, pulling Emma close as the referee's whistle signaled the start of the game. "Ready, Daddy," Emma replied, completely unaware of her father's growing concern about the rowdy group behind them. The game was about to begin, but James Cooper had a feeling that football might not be the only action they'd see today. The first quarter of the game passed quickly, with both teams playing well. James and Emma cheered as their team scored a touchdown, but the celebration was cut short by a loud crash behind them. One of the bikers had knocked over his beer, spilling it onto several people sitting nearby. "Watch where you put your stuff, old man," the biker with the gray beard shouted at an elderly gentleman who was trying to move his jacket away from the spilled beer. The old man, probably in his 70s, mumbled an apology even though it wasn't his fault. His wife clutched his arm, looking scared. James felt his military instincts stirring. He'd seen bullies like this before. They picked on people they thought wouldn't fight back. He watched as the elderly couple tried to dry their belongings with paper napkins, their hands shaking slightly. "Here, sir." James turned and offered his own clean handkerchief to the old man. "This might help better than those napkins." As he reached back, he got his first close look at the bikers. Besides the gray-bearded leader, there was a younger man with tattoos covering his neck. Two heavily built guys who looked like brothers, and a shorter man with a nasty scar across his cheek. "Mind your own business, pretty boy," the leader growled, but James noticed how the man's eyes flickered to his military haircut and his muscular build. There was a moment of tension before Emma's voice broke through. "Daddy, look, they're bringing out the team mascot." Her excited voice pulled James back to why they were there. He turned around, but kept his senses alert to what was happening behind him. During the second quarter, things got worse. The bikers started throwing peanut shells at people sitting in front of them. An usher finally came over to ask them to stop, but they just laughed at her. The young woman, probably a college student working part-time, walked away looking embarrassed. "What a joke," one of the tattooed bikers sneered. "They sent a little girl to tell us what to do?" A few minutes later, an old hot dog vendor made his way down the aisle. He was struggling with his heavy tray, carefully balancing hot dogs and drinks. As he passed the bikers' row, one of the brother-looking guys stuck out his foot. The vendor stumbled but didn't fall, thanks to a quick-thinking fan who caught his arm. Several hot dogs tumbled from his tray, and the bikers roared with laughter. I'll have to pay for those," the vendor said quietly, looking at the wasted food. His hands were trembling as he tried to clean up the mess. James had seen enough. He reached into his wallet and pulled out some money. "Sir," he called to the vendor, "I'll pay for those lost hot dogs." He walked over and helped the old man pick up the scattered food. "You some kind of hero?" the scarred biker called out mockingly. "Always gotta help the weak ones, huh?" James ignored them and spoke quietly to the vendor. "If they give you any more trouble, talk to security. There are cameras in this section." The old man nodded gratefully and hurried away. Emma was watching all of this with worried eyes. "Are those men bad people, Daddy?" James chose his words carefully. "Sometimes people forget how to be kind, sweetheart. The best thing we can do is show them what kindness looks like." The game continued, but the tension in their section kept growing. Other families started moving away, leaving empty seats around the bikers. James noticed the leader making phone calls, and two more rough-looking men joined their group during halftime. A young mother sitting next to Emma was trying to calm her crying baby. The bikers' loud voices and cursing were clearly upsetting the infant. James could see she was close to tears herself. "Would you like to switch seats with us?" James offered. "We're a bit further from them." The woman gave him a grateful smile as they changed places, putting James and Emma between her and the troublemakers. As the second quarter was ending, Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, I need to use the bathroom." James checked his watch. Halftime was about to start. He glanced back at the bikers, who were now passing around a flask despite the stadium's no-alcohol policy. Something in his gut told him the situation was about to get worse. "Okay, princess," he said, standing up. "Let's go now before the halftime rush." As they moved toward the aisle, James couldn't shake the feeling that leaving their seats might lead to something he'd been trying to avoid. But sometimes, he knew from experience, confrontation finds you whether you want it or not. The stadium corridors were getting crowded as people headed out for halftime. James stood outside the women's restroom, keeping a watchful eye on the entrance while Emma was inside. Years of military training had taught him to always position himself where he could see all approaching angles. "I'll be quick, Daddy," Emma had promised before disappearing into the restroom. James smiled. Knowing quick meant at least 5 minutes in kids' time. He noticed a young couple walking by, probably college students, wearing matching team jerseys. They were holding hands and laughing about something. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The 5 bikers from their section, plus their 2 new friends, emerged from around the corner. James watched as they spotted the young couple. The group spread out in a practiced way that immediately caught his attention. This wasn't their first time surrounding victims. "Hey, college boy," the gray-bearded leader called out. "Nice watch you got there." The young man instinctively covered his wrist, pulling his girlfriend closer. "Please, we don't want any trouble," the young man said, his voice shaking slightly. His girlfriend clutched his arm tighter. The bikers had now formed a complete circle around the couple. James noticed how they positioned themselves, the two biggest guys blocking the main exit route, the others cutting off any escape paths. The leader and the scarred man moved closer to the couple. "No trouble at all," the leader smirked. "Just hand over the watch, your wallet, and the lady's purse, and you can go back to your perfect little date." James checked the restroom entrance. Emma was still inside. He could hear running water from the sink. Making a quick decision, he moved closer to the scene, staying in the shadows of a stadium pillar. He counted weapons. 2 knives poorly concealed in boots. 1 possible brass knuckles in a back pocket. These weren't just rowdy fans, they were organized criminals. The young man tried to step back, but bumped into one of the tattooed brothers. I'll give you my watch, but please let my girlfriend go." "How sweet," the scarred biker laughed. "But we'll decide what we're taking." The leader reached for the girl's purse, and she screamed. The sound echoed through the corridor, but the crowd noise from the stadium drowned it out. Most people passing by turned away, pretending not to see what was happening. James had seen enough. He tried to avoid confrontation all day, but some situations demanded action. He thought of Emma, safe in the restroom, and knew he had about 2 minutes before she'd come looking for him. 7 against 2 seems a bit unfair, James said loudly, stepping out from behind the pillar. His voice carried the authority of someone used to commanding troops in combat zones. "Why don't you try picking on someone your own size?" The bikers turned, surprised by the interruption. Recognition flickered across the leader's face as he remembered James from their section. Well, if it isn't the Good Samaritan," the leader sneered. "This ain't your business, Boy Scout. Walk away while you can." James moved closer, his stance relaxed but ready. "Actually, it is my business. See, I'm having a nice day out with my daughter, and you're ruining everyone's good time with your little criminal operation here." The scarred biker pulled out his knife, trying to be subtle about it. James noticed how he held it. Blade reversed, meant for slashing rather than stabbing. Amateur move. "Last chance to walk away," the leader warned, cracking his knuckles. James sighed. "Here's what's going to happen. That couple is going to walk away right now. Then we're all going to return to our seats and enjoy the rest of the game. Nobody needs to get hurt." The bikers laughed, but James noticed the young couple slowly edging toward the gap he created in the circle. The leader saw it too and moved to stop them. "They ain't going nowhere until we get what we want," he growled, reaching for the girl's arm. Just then, James heard the restroom door opening behind him. Emma would step out any second. Time had run out for peaceful resolution. "I warned you," James said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd faced far worse threats than angry bikers. He shifted his weight slightly, ready for what would come next. The leader's hand was still reaching for the girl. The knife-wielding biker was moving to his left, and James could hear Emma's footsteps getting closer. The next few seconds would decide everything. Time seemed to slow down as James assessed the situation. Emma's footsteps were getting closer, the young couple was frozen in fear, and 7 angry bikers were about to make a very big mistake. He had to end this quickly. "Emma, sweetheart," James called out without turning around. "Go to the pretzel stand and wait for me there." His voice was calm but firm, the same tone he'd used with his soldiers in dangerous situations. "But Daddy," Emma started to protest. "Now, Princess, please." This time there was no room for argument in his voice. James heard her footsteps retreat, and something in his stance changed. With his daughter safely away, the soldier in him took over. The gray-bearded leader moved first, swinging a meaty fist at James's head. It was a sloppy punch, fueled by beer and overconfidence. James stepped inside the punch, using the biker's own momentum to guide him face-first into the concrete wall. The leader dropped to his knees, blood streaming from his nose. "What the hell?" the scarred biker shouted, slashing with his knife. James caught his wrist mid-swing, applying pressure to the radial nerve. The knife clattered to the ground as the man's hand went numb. The 2 tattooed brothers came at him together. James had trained for situations like this in close-quarters combat. He dropped low, sweeping the legs out from under the first brother while simultaneously driving an elbow into the second one's solar plexus. Both went down hard. "Run," James shouted to the young couple. They didn't need to be told twice. quickly disappearing down the corridor. The remaining bikers hesitated, suddenly unsure. Their leader was still on his knees, two of their strongest guys were on the ground, and this man they'd thought was just another stadium dad had taken them apart in seconds. "He's just one guy," the scarred biker yelled, shaking feeling back into his hand. "Get him!" The last three bikers rushed James together. He backed up against the wall, eliminating one attack angle. The first biker reached him, throwing wild punches. James blocked two strikes before landing a short, sharp jab to the man's throat. The biker staggered back, choking. Something metallic glinted, brass knuckles. The next biker swung hard, but James had fought against worse weapons in Afghanistan. He caught the armed hand and twisted, using his attacker's body as a shield against the last biker. The brass knuckles went flying, skittering across the floor. The final biker pulled back his fist, but before he could throw the punch, his eyes widened at something behind James. Two security guards were running toward them, radios crackling. "Break it up!" one guard shouted. "Break it up now!" The bikers who could still stand started to scatter, but James's voice cut through the chaos. "Nobody move!" The command in his voice made everyone freeze, even the security guards. James reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out his military ID. Staff Sergeant James Cooper, Special Forces. These men were attempting to rob a young couple. There should be security camera footage. He nodded toward the cameras mounted in the corridor corners. The leader, finally getting to his feet, spat blood on the ground. "You're dead, soldier boy. You hear me? Dead." One of the security guards, an older man with gray hair, looked at James's ID and then at the scene around him. 7 tough-looking bikers, all in various states of disarray, taken down by one man. "Richards." The older guard spoke into his radio. "Get police to section 103 corridor. And send someone to check the cameras." He turned to James. "Mind sticking around, Sergeant? We'll need a statement." James nodded, then remembered Emma. "My daughter's at the pretzel stand. Can someone?" "I'll get her," the younger guard offered, clearly impressed by what he'd just witnessed. The bikers were sitting against the wall now, under the older guard's watchful eye. The leader kept glaring at James, but said nothing more. The two brothers were helping each other up, both moving gingerly. The one who'd taken the elbow to the solar plexus was still having trouble breathing. Down the corridor, James could see Emma being escorted back by the young guard. She looked worried but broke into a smile when she saw her father was okay. "Daddy, are you all right?" she called out, running toward him. James smiled, the soldier fading back into the father. "I'm fine, Princess. But I think we might miss the third quarter." The security office was a small room filled with monitor screens showing different parts of the stadium. James sat with Emma beside him, her small hand holding his tightly. 2 police officers were reviewing the security footage while the gray-bearded biker leader and his gang sat handcuffed in the corner, looking much less intimidating than before. "Play that part again," Officer Martinez said, leaning closer to the screen. They watched as the footage showed how quickly James had taken down all 7 bikers. The second officer, Roberts, whistled in admiration. "Where'd you learn to fight like that, Sergeant Cooper?" Roberts asked, pausing the video. 3 tours in Afghanistan, sir. Special Forces training," James replied simply. Emma looked up at her father with pride, though she was still trying to understand everything that had happened. The door opened, and the young couple from the corridor walked in. The girl's eyes were red from crying, but she managed a grateful smile when she saw James. "That's him," the young man said to the officers. "He saved us. Those men were going to take everything we had." He turned to James. "I'm Mike, and this is Sarah. We can't thank you enough." Before James could respond, another officer burst into the room. "You're gonna want to see this," he said, holding up some papers. "We ran their IDs through the system. These guys are part of the Steel Vipers motorcycle gang. They've been hitting sporting events all across the state, robberies, assaults, extortion. FBI's been looking for them for months." The gray-bearded leader's face went pale. His tough guy act completely disappeared as he realized how serious the situation had become. The other bikers started arguing among themselves, blaming each other for getting caught. "Shut up, all of you," the leader shouted, but his authority was gone. The scarred biker turned to the officers. "Look, I want to make a deal," he said quickly. I know where they keep their stuff, where they plan their hits. I'll tell you everything. Officer Martinez smiled. Looks like your little gang is falling apart, fellas. He turned to James. Sergeant Cooper, you didn't just stop a robbery today. You helped us crack a case that's been giving us headaches for months. Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. Daddy, does this mean the bad men won't hurt anyone else? James hugged his daughter close. That's right, Princess. They're going away for a long time. The stadium security chief, a tall woman named Anderson, entered the room carrying some papers. Sergeant Cooper, the stadium owner would like to speak with you. She paused, looking at Emma. And as for this young lady, I hear someone missed getting her hot dog earlier. Emma's face lit up as Anderson handed her a voucher for free food at any stadium concession stand. Can we get nachos too, Daddy? The room filled with gentle laughter, breaking the tension. Even some of the officers had to smile. Before you go, Officer Martinez said, we'll need your contact information. The FBI will probably want to talk to you about this case. While James was filling out forms, Mike and Sarah approached Emma. Your dad is a real hero, Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's level. Like a superhero, but better because he's real. I know, Emma replied proudly. He was a hero in the army too, but he doesn't like to talk about it. The security footage was still playing on one of the monitors. James watched as Mike and Sarah studied it, seeing how close they'd come to being robbed, or worse. The young couple held hands tightly, still shaken by the experience. Sergeant Cooper, the security chief said, the stadium owner wants to upgrade your tickets. Private box seats for the rest of the game. James looked at Emma, who was still clutching her food voucher with excitement. What do you say, Princess? Want to watch the rest of the game in style? Yes, Emma jumped up. Can Mike and Sarah come too? They're our friends now, right? The adults exchanged smiles at her innocent question. The security chief nodded. I'm sure we can arrange that. As they prepared to leave the security office, James heard one of the bikers mutter, of all the people we could mess with, we had to pick a special forces soldier. Officer Roberts laughed. Sometimes the wrong person you mess with turns out to be exactly the right person to bring you to justice. Emma took her father's hand as they walked out. Daddy, I think I know what I want to be when I grow up. What's that, sweetheart? A soldier who helps people, just like you. The private box suite was nothing like their original seats. Plush leather chairs, a widescreen TV showing game replays, and a full buffet spread made Emma's eyes grow wide. Mike and Sarah joined them, still looking grateful and slightly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Look, Daddy, we can see the whole field from here. Emma pressed her face against the large window. Below them, the third quarter was about to begin, and the crowd was buzzing with energy. But something interesting was happening in the stands. Word about the incident had spread through the stadium like wildfire. People in Section 103, who had witnessed the bikers' bad behavior earlier, were telling others about the soldier who had stopped the gang. Phones were out as people shared the story on social media, and soon the stadium's big screen showed a news alert. Local hero helps capture wanted criminal gang at today's game. Man, you're going viral, Mike said, showing James his phone. Videos taken by witnesses in the corridor were already getting thousands of views. One clip showed James taking down the bikers with military precision while protecting the young couple. Sarah, who had finally stopped shaking from their earlier ordeal, sat next to Emma. Your dad made a really brave choice today, she told the young girl. He could have walked away, but he didn't. That's because Daddy always says doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right, Emma replied, repeating words she'd clearly heard many times before. A knock on the suite door made everyone turn. A man in an expensive suit walked in, followed by the stadium security chief Anderson. Sergeant Cooper, I'm David Mitchell, owner of the team and this stadium, the man said, extending his hand. I wanted to personally thank you for what you did today. Those criminals have been causing trouble at sporting events across 3 states. James shook his hand firmly. Just did what anyone would do, sir. Mitchell smiled. No, Sergeant, not anyone would have or could have done what you did, which is why I have a proposal for you. He gestured to Chief Anderson to continue. We've been looking to upgrade our security training program, Anderson explained. After seeing how you handled the situation today, minimal force, no serious injuries, perfect threat assessment, We'd like to offer you a position as our security training consultant. James looked surprised. I'm flattered, but I already have a job at the Veterans Center. This would be part-time, weekends mainly, Mitchell added. You'd help train our security team in threat assessment, conflict resolution, and proper response techniques. Plus, he smiled at Emma. It comes with season tickets for you and your family. Emma's face lit up. Season tickets? Really? Can we come to every game, Daddy? Before James could answer, another person entered the suite, a tall woman in an FBI jacket. Sorry to interrupt, she said, showing her badge. I'm Agent Lisa Chen. We've been tracking the Steel Vipers gang for 8 months. She turned to James. Thanks to you, Sergeant Cooper, we can now link them to 12 other incidents. Mind if I ask you a few questions? The next half hour was busy. While Emma watched the game with Mike and Sarah, James answered Agent Chen's questions and discussed the job offer with Mitchell and Anderson. The suite door kept opening as various officials came to get statements or offer thanks. During a quiet moment, Mike pulled James aside. I need to tell you something, he said, reaching into his pocket. I was going to propose to Sarah today at the game. He showed James a small ring box. When those bikers surrounded us, I thought I'd lose everything. But thanks to you. His voice cracked with emotion. James put a hand on Mike's shoulder. The day's not over yet. As if on cue, the stadium's Kiss Cam feature started on the big screen. Usually, it showed random couples in the crowd, but this time it focused on their suite. Mike looked at James, who nodded encouragingly. The entire stadium watched on the big screen as Mike got down on one knee in front of Sarah. Emma grabbed her father's hand in excitement as Sarah's hands flew to her mouth in surprise. Sarah, Mike's voice trembled slightly. After what happened today, I realize life is precious and we shouldn't wait to seize our happiness. Will you marry me? The stadium went quiet, waiting for her answer. Sarah, tears in her eyes, nodded yes as the crowd erupted in cheers. Emma jumped up and down, clapping. James watched it all with a small smile, thinking how a day that could have gone terribly wrong had turned into something beautiful. Sometimes, he realized, being in the right place at the right time meant more than just stopping bad guys, it meant being part of something good too. The next morning, James's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Local news stations wanted interviews, and his social media was flooded with friend requests. The video of him stopping the bikers had gone viral overnight, reaching millions of views. But James wasn't interested in fame. He had a regular job to get to at the Veterans Center. You're all over the news, Cooper. Bill, his co-worker at the center, waved a newspaper as James walked in. The headline read, Special Forces veteran takes down notorious biker gang at stadium. Below was a picture of James and Emma in the private suite, taken from the stadium's cameras. Just did what needed to be done, James replied simply, heading to his office, but today was different. The waiting room was fuller than usual, with young veterans sitting nervously in their chairs. One of them, a skinny kid probably fresh out of basic training, approached James. Sir, I saw what you did yesterday. That's why I'm here today. I need help, and seeing you on the news made me think maybe it's okay to ask for it. James understood immediately. Many veterans struggled to seek help, thinking it made them look weak. His actions at the stadium had somehow given them permission to be both strong and vulnerable. Come on in, James gestured to his office. Let's talk. Throughout the morning, more veterans came in. Each had seen the news and felt connected to James's story. Some wanted advice about transitioning to civilian life, others just needed someone who understood their experiences. Around lunchtime, Emma's school called. Mr. Cooper, the principal said, your daughter gave quite an interesting presentation in her My Hero class project today. The other children were very impressed, though we had to correct her when she said her daddy took down 50 bikers single-handedly. James chuckled. Yeah, she tends to exaggerate sometimes. It was only 7. 7? The principal sounded shocked. Well, just wanted to let you know she got an A+ on her presentation. After work, James drove to the police station for a follow-up interview. Detective Martinez greeted him with a grin. The Steel Vipers are singing like canaries, he said. Turns out they've been running schemes at sporting events in 5 states, not just 3. The FBI's ecstatic. In the interview room, James learned more about the gang's operations. They had been targeting families and couples at games, using the crowd noise to cover their crimes. His intervention hadn't just stopped one robbery, it brought down their entire network. The scarred guy, Rogers, he's testified against the whole gang, Martinez explained. Says watching you take down their leader made him realize they weren't as tough as they thought. Sometimes it just takes one person standing up to break the illusion of power. As they finished the interview, Martinez handed James an envelope. The stadium's insurance company wanted you to have this, a reward for preventing what could have been a major lawsuit. James tried to refuse, but Martinez insisted. Take it, set up a college fund for Emma or something. Good deeds should be rewarded. On his way home, James stopped at Mike and Sarah's apartment. They had invited him and Emma for dinner to thank him properly. The young couple had transformed their small living room into a celebration space, with balloons and a thank you banner. We wanted to ask you something, Sarah said during dinner, holding Mike's hand. Would you be willing to come to our wedding? We'd be honored if you and Emma would be our special guests. Emma nearly bounced out of her chair with excitement. Can we, Daddy, please? Before James could answer, Mike added, and maybe, would you consider being one of my groomsmen? I know we just met, but what happened yesterday, it changed our lives. The evening was filled with laughter and plans for the future. Emma helped Sarah look at wedding magazines, while Mike showed James their ideas for the ceremony. It was strange how one moment of courage had created such strong bonds between strangers. As they drove home, Emma was unusually quiet. What's on your mind, princess? James asked. Daddy, today at school, everyone wanted to know about what happened. They said you're a hero. She paused. But you're just my dad. You're always my hero, even when you're not fighting bad guys. James smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Sometimes the biggest victories weren't about fighting at all. They were about showing others, especially your children, how to live with courage and compassion. 1 week after the stadium incident, James sat in a large conference room at FBI headquarters. Agent Chen was presenting evidence about the Steel Vipers case to a room full of law enforcement officials from different states. Thanks to Sergeant Cooper's intervention, Agent Chen pointed to a map on the screen. We've uncovered criminal activities in 12 stadiums across 5 states. The gang's operations included robbery, extortion, and selling fake tickets. James listened as they detailed how his actions had led to something much bigger. The Steel Vipers had been running their scheme for 2 years, targeting families and couples at sporting events. They had stolen over $500,000 and hurt many innocent people. The gang's leader, Frank Gray Bear Thompson, had a history of violence. Chen continued, showing mugshots on the screen. But he'd never faced someone like Sergeant Cooper before. During a break, James checked his phone. There was a text from Mike with a photo attached. He and Sarah were trying on wedding clothes. Best man suit fitting next week? The message read. James smiled, still amazed at how life could change so quickly. Another message popped up, this one from the stadium's security chief Anderson. First training session this Saturday. 20 guards signed up. They're excited to learn from you. The next message made him pause. It was from a mother whose son had been at the game. My Tommy saw what you did, she wrote. He's been having trouble with bullies at school. After seeing how you handled those men without becoming a bully yourself, he finally had the courage to tell his teachers what was happening. Thank you. Back in the meeting, Agent Chen revealed something surprising. The Steel Vipers were planning something big for the championship game next month, she explained. They had fake tickets printed and were going to rob people in the parking lots. We estimate they could have stolen tens of thousands of dollars. Several officials shook James's hand during lunch. You prevented a lot of suffering, one senior FBI agent told him, and you did it without causing serious injury to anyone. That's impressive. Later that afternoon, James visited the Veterans Center. The waiting room was still fuller than usual, but something was different. Veterans weren't just coming for help, they were offering to help others. I want to volunteer, a tough-looking former Marine told James. Saw what you did at the stadium. Reminded me why I joined the service, to protect people. Maybe I can still do that, just in a different way. James introduced him to Bill, who ran the center's volunteer program. More veterans were stepping up, wanting to be part of something positive. The center was becoming more than a place for help, it was becoming a community. That evening, James took Emma to her karate class. She had started lessons the day after the stadium incident, saying she wanted to learn to protect people like her dad did. Her instructor, Ms. Rodriguez, called James over. Emma told the class about what happened, she said. But what impressed me most was how she described it. She didn't focus on the fighting. She talked about choosing when not to fight, about protecting others, about being brave enough to step up when needed. James watched as Emma practiced her moves. She was small but determined, just like he had been at her age. After class, they stopped for ice cream. Emma was quiet for a while, then asked, "Daddy, do you think those bad men will learn to be good?" James thought about it carefully. Sometimes people make bad choices because they think it's their only option. But when they see there's another way to live, some of them choose to change. Like how that scarred man helped the police. Exactly, James nodded. Sometimes people just need to see an example of doing the right thing. As they drove home, they passed the stadium. The big screen outside was showing an advertisement for the next game, but it also included a new message. Home of Heroes, where safety comes first. Emma pointed excitedly. "Look, Daddy, they're still talking about you." James shook his head. "They're talking about everyone who chooses to do the right thing, Princess. The security guards, the police, the FBI agents, even people like Mike who protect others in their own way. And me too, right? When I learned karate." "Yes, sweetheart. But remember what I taught you about being strong." Emma recited proudly, "True strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about when you choose not to hit at all." James smiled. Sometimes the best lessons came from unexpected moments, and sometimes one act of courage could create ripples that changed many lives. 3 weeks had passed since the stadium incident. On a bright Saturday morning, James stood in the stadium's training room, facing 20 eager security guards. It was his first official training session as their new consultant. "Today's lesson isn't about fighting," James began, pacing in front of the group. "It's about preventing fights before they happen." He noticed some confused looks among the guards, who had probably expected to learn combat moves. Chief Anderson stood at the back of the room, nodding approvingly. The previous week, she had shown James the statistics. Reports of troublemaking at games had dropped by 40%, just because word had spread about what happened to the Steel Vipers. "Sir," one young guard raised his hand, "but what if we have to fight like you did with those bikers?" James picked up a newspaper from his desk. The headline read, "Steel Vipers gang members plead guilty, face long prison terms." Below was a photo of the gray-bearded leader being led into court. "That fight lasted less than 2 minutes, James explained. "But do you know what really won that day? 6 months of me watching them, evaluating the threat, and choosing the right moment to act. Observation is your best weapon." The guards leaned forward, suddenly interested. James continued, "Let me show you what I noticed that day, starting from when they first entered the stadium." Using the security cameras' recorded footage, James walked them through every detail, how the bikers had positioned themselves, their body language, the signs of concealed weapons. The guards took notes rapidly, seeing their job in a completely new way. During a break, Chief Anderson approached James. "The FBI called this morning. Remember that reward money you donated to start a security training program for other stadiums? 3 more venues want to implement your training model." James nodded, remembering how he'd refused to keep the reward for himself. Instead, he proposed using it to help other stadiums improve their security. Emma had been proud of his decision, even though it meant no new bike for her birthday. Speaking of Emma, she was in the stadium too that day, but not watching her father's training. Mike and Sarah had invited her to help choose decorations for their wedding, which would be held right there in the stadium's event center. "Your dad really changed our lives," Sarah told Emma as they looked at flower arrangements. "Not just by saving us that day, but by showing us how one person's courage can make a difference." Mike added, "That's why we wanted to get married here. To remind ourselves that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best ones." Emma beamed with pride. "Daddy says that too. He says bad things don't last forever if good people stand up to them." Back in the training room, James was teaching the guards about crowd psychology. Suddenly, a familiar face appeared at the door. Agent Chen from the FBI. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, walking in. "But I thought your trainees should hear this." She turned to address the group. Thanks to the evidence we gathered from the Steel Vipers case, we've identified similar gang operations at 3 other major sports venues. Sergeant Cooper's techniques for spotting trouble before it starts are now being taught at FBI training sessions. The guards whispered among themselves, impressed. James remained modest, but inside he felt satisfied. His military experience was helping protect civilians in ways he hadn't expected. After the training, James found Emma in the event center, surrounded by wedding magazines and flower samples. She ran to hug him. "Daddy, Sarah asked if I could be her junior bridesmaid," Emma exclaimed. "And guess what? Mike's little cousin Tommy is going to be the ring bearer. He's the boy who stood up to his bullies after seeing what you did." James hugged his daughter back, realizing how their lives had become intertwined with so many others since that game day. The stadium, once just a place to watch sports, had become something more, a symbol of how courage could bring people together. Later that evening, as they walked to their car, they passed section 103, where it all began. A new sign had been installed. "If you see something, say something. Our security team is here to help." Emma read the sign and smiled. "They're like your soldiers now, right, Daddy? All trying to protect people?" James looked at his daughter, amazed at how she could make complex things seem so simple. "That's right, Princess. Sometimes the best battles are the ones we prevent from happening at all." As they drove home, the setting sun painted the stadium in golden light. Another game would be played tomorrow, and thanks to what happened 3 weeks ago, everyone there would be a little bit safer. 6 months had passed since the day James Cooper faced down the Steel Vipers gang. The stadium was packed once again, but this time for a very different reason: Mike and Sarah's wedding day. The event center had been transformed into a beautiful wedding venue. White flowers and soft blue ribbons decorated every row of chairs. Emma, wearing a junior bridesmaid dress that matched her eyes, practiced walking down the aisle one last time before the ceremony. "Nervous?" James asked Mike in the groom's room, adjusting his best man tie. The young man who had once been terrified of bikers now stood tall in his wedding suit. "Not anymore," Mike smiled. "After what we went through that day, everything else seems easier. You taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are scared." The wedding guests included some surprising faces. Officer Martinez and Agent Chen sat in the back row. The stadium security team, many of whom had been trained by James, handled the event security with pride. Even some veterans from the center had come, now volunteering as ushers. Chief Anderson approached James before the ceremony. "You won't believe this," she said excitedly. "Our new security program has been adopted by 23 stadiums across the country. Gang-related crimes are down by 60% nationwide." James nodded, but his attention was on Emma, who was helping Sarah with her wedding veil in the bride's room. His daughter had changed over these months. More confident, more aware of how one person could make a difference. The ceremony began. As James stood beside Mike, he remembered that day 6 months ago. Who could have known that stopping 7 bikers would lead to all this? The Steel Vipers were now serving long prison sentences, but something unexpected had happened. 2 of the younger members had written to James from jail, asking for help to turn their lives around when they got out. Sarah walked down the aisle, beautiful in her white dress. In the front row, her parents sat with tears in their eyes. They had almost lost their daughter that day at the game. Instead, they were gaining a son-in-law who had proven his courage when it mattered most. During the reception, Emma gave a surprise speech. "My daddy always says that heroes don't wear capes," she began, her voice clear and strong. "They just make good choices when bad things happen. Mike and Sarah taught me that love is stronger than fear. And Daddy taught me that sometimes the best way to fight is to protect others." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. James felt a surge of pride, not for what he had done that day at the stadium, but for how his daughter had understood what really mattered about it. Later, during the father-daughter dance, Emma looked up at James. "Daddy, remember when those bad men were in our section at the game? Were you scared?" James thought carefully before answering. "Yes, Princess, I was, but I was more scared of what might happen if nobody stood up to them. Like how Sarah says she was scared to walk into stadiums after what happened, but she's not anymore because she knows good people will help." Exactly like that. The wedding party continued into the evening. The stadium lights glowed softly through the windows. Tomorrow, there would be another game here. James would be training more security guards, Emma would be practicing her karate, and somewhere, people would be making choices about whether to help others or look away. As Mike and Sarah prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Sarah hugged James tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for saving us that day, but for showing us that happy endings are possible even after scary moments." Emma threw rose petals as the newlyweds drove away. The stadium scoreboard lit up with a special message. "Congratulations, Mike and Sarah. Love wins." Walking to their car later, James and Emma passed section 103 again. A small plaque had been installed there. "On this spot, one person's courage changed many lives. Be the change you wish to see." "Daddy," Emma said sleepily as they drove home, "I think I understand now why you joined the army, why you help veterans, and why you stopped those bad men." "Why's that, Princess?" "Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting, it's showing others how to be brave too." James smiled in the darkness. His daughter had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength wasn't about winning fights, but about helping others find their own courage. And sometimes, the wrong person to mess with turns out to be the right person to change everything.